Welcome to a new episode of Metali Rari Podcast. You know, when we think about the conflict in Ukraine, I guess the images that come to mind are usually battlefields and tanks. But there's another side to this war, a side that's often overlooked, the battle for resources.
Yeah, that's right. You see, beneath the surface of this conflict, there's this treasure trove of mineral wealth that could have massive implications, for the global economy.
Okay, so let's dig into this. What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about trillions of dollars worth of raw materials, iron ore for steel production, coal to fuel power plants, lithium for those electric car batteries everyone's talking about, even uranium.
Wow, trillions. That's not just pocket change.
Not at all. And, it helps explain why certain areas have become so strategically important, in this conflict. Take the city of Vuhledar, for example, which was recently captured. Its name literally translates to gift of coal.
Gift of gold. That sounds almost poetic in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess in this context, it's a pretty grim gift.
Yeah, it is. It really highlights how this conflict, it isn't just about territory. It's about control of resources that could fuel economies, for decades to come.
Now, early on, it seemed like Russia was focused on capturing, key political and military targets.
Yeah.
But in the past year, their focus has shifted south to areas that are rich in these minerals. Is this a sign that they're thinking long-term?
It certainly seems that way, their initial strategy may have been aimed at a swift victory, but as the war has dragged on, they've had to adapt. Now it looks like they're playing a different game, a game of resource control.
But can they really win this game? Russia's already facing heavy sanctions. Their economy isn't exactly thriving. Can they really afford to take on another prolonged conflict, especially one with so many potential pitfalls?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? On the one hand, controlling these resources. That could give them leverage, potentially mitigating the impact of sanctions. But on the other hand, securing and exploiting these resources in a war-torn region, well, that's a massive undertaking, one that could further strain their already struggling economy.
And what about the lithium? Everyone's talking about electric vehicles and the need for batteries. Controlling a significant chunk of the world's lithium supply has to be a pretty big deal, right?
Absolutely. Lithium is essential for the batteries that power electric vehicles. And with the global push for green energy demand is skyrocketing. Whoever controls that lithium supply chain, well, they'll have a huge influence on this burgeoning industry.
So capturing one of Ukraine's three main lithium extraction areas, that was a pretty strategic move on Russia's part.
It was a power play, no doubt about it, and sends a clear message. Russia intends to be a major player in that global lithium market, and that has implications far beyond the battlefield. It could impact the price of electric vehicles, the pace of the green energy transition, even the balance of power between nations.
Okay, so we've got Ukraine sitting on this incredible wealth of resources, Russia making strategic moves to control those resources, and the rest of the world watching with bated breath. This is starting to feel like a high-stakes poker game with global implications.
That's a good analogy, because just like in poker, the players in this conflict, well, they're making calculated bets, trying to anticipate their opponent's moves and maximize their own gains. The stakes are incredibly high, and the outcome is far from certain.
And then there's the issue of Ukraine's economy. It's been absolutely devastated by the war.
Yeah.
They're relying heavily on foreign aid and loans. Some Western politicians have even suggested that Ukraine could use its mineral wealth to repay those debts. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a complicated issue, to say the least. There's a lot of uncertainty about how much of Ukraine's mineral wealth is even accessible right now, especially with Russia controlling key mining areas.
So even if we assume that Ukraine could eventually extract and sell enough minerals to generate, significant revenue, which is a big if, there's still the question of whether they'd even have control over those resources to begin with.
Exactly. And then there are the warnings from organizations like Fitch about Ukraine's growing deficit and the potential for hyperinflation.
Wait, back up a second. What exactly is hyperinflation?
Hyperinflation is a rapid and excessive increase in prices. It can erode the value of a currency, making it almost worthless. Imagine going to the store one day and a loaf of bread costs $5, and then the next week it costs $50, and then the week after that it costs $500. That's hyperinflation.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. It can destabilize entire economies, leading to social unrest and political instability. And it's a very real concern for Ukraine right now.
So telling Ukraine to bank on its mineral wealth, to repay its debts, that seems like a pretty risky proposition, especially when you consider the potential for hyperinflation.
It's incredibly risky. It's like telling someone to bet their life savings on a lottery ticket. There's a chance they could win big, but the odds are stacked against them.
And yet some Western leaders seem to be pushing for exactly that, urging Ukraine to keep fighting, potentially dangling the promise of future mineral wealth as a way to repay the massive debts they're incurring. It
First,
almost feels like they're saying, just keep fighting, and eventually you'll be rich enough to pay us back.
yeah, it's a cynical perspective, but one that's been voiced by critics of Western involvement in the conflict. Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, put it rather bluntly, saying that the West is pushing Ukraine to fight to the last man to repay their debts.
That's a chilling thought. So we've got Ukraine caught between a rock and a hard place, with Russia grabbing valuable resources and some in the West potentially exploiting their desperate situation. This is starting to feel less like a poker game and more like a tragedy.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers. But it highlights the moral dilemmas at the heart of this conflict, the tension between national interests, economic ambitions, and the human cost of war.
Now, with Donald Trump back in the White House, there's been talk of a potential ceasefire. But even if the fighting stops, what happens to Ukraine's mining sector? Will it just become a free-for-all with everyone scrambling to get their hands on these valuable resources?
That's a very real concern. A ceasefire would be a welcome step towards peace, but it wouldn't necessarily resolve the underlying issue of resource control. In fact, it could even exacerbate tensions as various actors, both within and outside Ukraine, vie for access to these valuable assets.
So even if the guns fall silent, the battle for Ukraine's mineral wealth could continue just in a different form.
Precisely. We've already seen signs of this. The UK, for example, recently signed a centenary partnership agreement with Ukraine, which specifically mentions priority access to Ukrainian minerals.
Hold on a minute. So while Western leaders are publicly calling for peace and diplomacy, they're also making backroom deals to secure access to Ukraine's resources. It sounds like everyone's trying to get a piece of the pie.
It does raise questions about the true motivations of some of the actors involved. Is it purely about supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and helping them rebuild, or is there a more self-serving agenda at play?
This whole situation is making my head spin. We've got Russia playing a long game of resource control, Ukraine caught in the middle, and Western powers potentially exploiting the situation for their own game. It's like a tangled web of competing interests, and it's hard to see how it all unravels.
It is a complex web, and it's difficult to predict how it will all play out. But one thing is clear. The control of Ukraine's mineral wealth is a crucial, often overlooked aspect of this conflict. It has the potential to shape not only the outcome of the war, but also the future economic and geopolitical landscape.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? Why should they care about what's happening with these minerals in a country halfway across the world?
Because this isn't just some regional conflict with local implications, the resources at stake here have global significance. We're talking about materials that are essential for everything from the cars we drive to the phones in our pockets. Whoever controls these resources will have a significant influence on the global economy, and that affects everyone, everywhere.
So it's not just about Ukraine. It's about the future of industries, technologies, and even the balance of power between nations.
Exactly, and it's about the ethical considerations surrounding resource extraction. Will these resources ultimately be used to benefit the people of Ukraine, or will they become a source of further conflict and exploitation?
That's a heavy question, and one that doesn't have an easy answer. It feels like we're at a crossroads, and the decisions made in the coming months and years could have long-lasting consequences.
You're right. The world is watching and the stakes are incredibly high. We can only hope that those in power will prioritize peace, stability, and the well-being of the Ukrainian people as they navigate this complex and challenging situation.
It's kind of crazy to think, something like minerals, right? Often they're buried deep underground. You wouldn't think they'd have such a profound impact on global events.
It really does, you know? It speaks to the interconnectedness of our world. The materials that make up our phones, our cars, our infrastructure, they often originate in places that are so far removed from our daily lives, but their availability and their control can have ripple effects across the globe.
Yeah, it makes you realize that this conflict in Ukraine, it's about so much more than just territory, right? It's about the future of key industries, the race for technological dominance, I guess ultimately the balance of power on the world stage.
Exactly, and for the people of Ukraine, right. Caught in the crosshairs of this geopolitical struggle, the stakes are incredibly high. Their country's natural wealth. It could either be a source of hope and opportunity for rebuilding their shattered economy, or a curse that fuels further conflict and instability.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Right.
what's the one key takeaway? What do you hope our listeners will remember?
I think it's the importance of awareness. We can't afford to be passive observers in this situation. By understanding the complexities of Ukraine's mineral wealth, the competing interests at play, and the potential consequences of how these resources are managed, well, we can all contribute to a more informed and engaged global dialogue.
And hopefully that dialogue, it'll lead to decisions that prioritize peace sustainability and the well-being of the Ukrainian people above short-term gains and, geopolitical maneuvering.
Absolutely. The future of Ukraine and perhaps even the world depends on it.
Well, that's our deep dive into the intricate and often overlooked world of Ukraine's mineral wealth. We've explored the types of resources, the strategic importance of their control, the economic and geopolitical implications, and the ethical considerations that must guide their management.
We've also highlighted the potential risks and rewards these resources present for Ukraine, the complexities of their future control and management amidst ongoing conflict and the prospect of a ceasefire. And most importantly, the need for global awareness and engagement to ensure their responsible and equitable utilization.
It's a story that's far from over, and we encourage our listeners to stay informed and continue exploring this, crucial issue. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you. We hope you found it enlightening and thought-provoking.